to talk about it. We hope that you will participate from the floor. So this is a bit workshopy as well for you to come in with your questions, answers, thoughts about like how power systems and power dynamics work. So it's understanding power systems from the local to the global, institutions, actors, and processes. So we are just going to have that first conversation. So my name is Nancy Kachimga, by the way. I forgot to introduce myself. My webinar etiquette is very poor. I'm very sorry. So I'm Nancy Kachimga. I'm based in Zimbabwe. And can I ask Priyanti to introduce herself and Toko to introduce yourself so that we know who you are, and then I'll try and get things rolling so that we start our conversation.
Okay, good evening, good afternoon and good evening to people in my part of the world. I'm based in Malaysia. I'm the executive director of the International Women's Rights Action Watch Asia Pacific. I'm actually Sri Lankan, and I have some Zimbabwean relatives, but we won't go into that just yet. So that's me. Yeah, if we can talk more about my work when Nancy opens us up to conversation, but that's a brief introduction.
Can you just repeat that it's the organization, and so everyone can say that.
The organization is the International Women's Rights Action Watch, Asia Pacific. We call ourselves ERO AP most often, and we are best known for the fact that we are the civil society organization that facilitates women's rights organizations' participation in the CEDAW review process. But our work is much broader than that.
Yeah. We'll talk more about that. Absolutely. Toko, thank you. Toko, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Togo Mache. I sit in Joburg. Good morning. It's morning here. Currently, I work for a Swedish funder, Olof Palme, but that's not who I really am. I would like to identify myself. If I identify with an organization, I will identify myself with Masmanyane Women's International, Women Rights International, an organization based in East London, East Coast of South Africa. That's where my spirit shakes. And my activism at the moment really has a heartbeat. I also have been on the advisory board of ERO Asia Pacific at one point. And I have also been on the board of International Feminist Women's Universities or something like that. Good to see you, Nancy. I love that smile.
Well, you know, thank you. It's quite early for me. So that's all I have is the smile at this time of the morning. So I want to just start with Toko. You said I know you've been with quite a few other organizations, so I'm going to start with you. And one of the organizations I know you were a founder of was
une des organisations.
Il y a un problème avec la traduction. I think you have to put your mic on mute. Is this me? Oh, shit.
Okay.
Hi.
Bonjour.
OK. On a un problème avec la traduction en français parce que j'entends et j'entends le français.
OK.
Oui. So there's a problem. There's a slight problem with the translation because as I'm speaking, I'm hearing the French translation.
Yeah, we are sorting that. He came in late, so please do carry on. We are going to take care of him now.
Okay.
J'espère
That was
que
just me showing off my French,
Oh.
the only other language that I speak very well, half well. Anyway, okay, so Toko, power system. You were a founder of an organization called Women in Politics Support Unit, which was about supporting women in the political process. And I would like you to talk about, it's a organization that's been for a long time, and I would like you to talk a little bit about, from the perspective of supporting women in politics, trying to get the quotas and representation, what your thoughts are about, or not your thoughts, but what do you think some of the lessons are that we've been learning about this whole topic about getting women in positions of power? Because we've had our disappointments and we've had our successes, but you were really a founder of WIPSU, which is an organization I also love very much. It's nonpartisan. We've worked with great women trying to get more women into political processes, but I think you can talk a little bit about that. And I know Priyanti will add her thoughts on from there. So please go ahead. You can give the long version of the answer.
The long version. I will start the long version from a lesson that I think for me stands out. The lesson is that as feminists and as we organize, especially around the issues of power, I have come to realize that we get lulled into just the women's rights realm. And yet, for us, it's always what's more, what's behind what is there. I will explain myself with the organization that Nancy is talking about. When we started WIPSU, it was the recognition that the women that were sitting in politics or in parliament needed support to build their capacities, to clarify and try and sell the women's agenda and the feminist agenda to them. Because the assumption that we had at that time is that if a woman goes into parliament, she will take up women's issues. It was coming from that. And we worked on that, even managed to get the women to form a women's caucus. For me, the lesson from even earlier then is that when we organize, advocate, and check for something, we should not sit and think we have arrived, because it's just the start of the journey. So for me, the key point is that as a feminist, I always need to look behind what's there, what can happen, because part of the thing is the silences that occur for when women advocate. And when women are in power, or part of the power machinery, they get silenced in all sorts of different ways. And that space shrinks. We think they have space, but that space shrinks. So that's why I then go back to the women's rights advocating is not the feminist advocating. I'll give an example for me. When Obama came to power, we were so excited. Everyone was excited. It was a Black man sitting at the top of one of what people thought was the greatest or strongest nation. I remember that day of the inauguration, watching my TV and thinking that my TV had been Obamaized by someone who will not change much in my life as a Black woman sitting in the South. And my voicing of what I felt then could feel like, how can you say that? It's a Black man, it's a whatever, he's sitting at the highest. What has that got to do with me as a woman? And what did it change my Lord sitting where I sat? He didn't decide alone. Yes, he did some funky things, fine. But he didn't decide alone, Congress decided. He pushed the policies that excluded me. He didn't do much for my sisters in Palestine because the whole US system is tied to Israel. So for me, the lessons come out of, we should not think that we've arrived when we have got to the station to get on a train. We haven't. And also for me, it's a question of always looking further, because until we are included, we are not there. Another example I want to give is the hashtag Metoo Movement around violence against women, mostly. If you look at the Metoo movement, there's a lot of silence in the violence around women in politics. We didn't hear that very loud and clear. It was contained. Why is that? I'll stop there. Nancy hasn't come back.
I'm back. I'm here. I'm here, Toko. I'm trying to remember that I'm a moderator, not a participant. Thank you so much for putting it all out as you do, And Priyanka, can you pick up from there and talk about your thoughts around systems of power, trying to access them? Go ahead. And you
Okay,
too.
thanks.
We want your long version.
Okay, Nancy, thanks. And I think it's important that you're as much a participant as you are a moderator. So keep that in mind. I'd like to, I really like the way Toko framed it about what's behind and what has it got to do with me. And I just really want to tell you my journey about the realization of power, because it's it probably speaks to the local. It probably speaks also to the personal. And I come from a country, Sri Lanka, where we have had them all in power, right? Or women in every, we've had the first woman prime minister, we've had a woman president, we have had a woman chief justice, we have had a woman attorney general. So women have been in positions of so-called power in all our structures. However, my stories are more about how the power structures play out in everyday life. And I think that's, in a sense, what Toko was saying when she said, what does it mean for me? And my earliest kind of, I suppose, maybe not my earliest, but I want to give you the example of my mother. My mother was a very intelligent and very beautiful woman. She hated anything domestic, and luckily was born into a sort of privileged setup where domesticity could be taken care of by someone else. But that didn't prevent her from being excluded by the patriarchal power structures that completely governed her life. So her father, that is my grandfather, refused to let her to go into university and study further, only because he felt that she would outshine his son and heir who struggled to get into university. And then she married my dad and joined the extended family home. And there her beauty actually marginalized her, and her intelligence was completely undervalued, because my two aunts, that's my two dad's sisters, had actually managed to break some ceilings, glass ceilings, and actually become professional women. But they completely undervalued my mother because she was the beautiful young wife. So there is a whole system of social power, or patriarchal social power, that completely constrains or circumscribes women in Sri Lanka, and I'm sure everywhere else. The other power, of course, is that I very early encountered, was the power of class, right? And I must admit that I come from the more privileged side of that equation. But my dad was very socialist and never let us forget that with that privilege comes a sense of responsibility. I also grew up at a time when there was, when the feudal systems were being politically broken down in the country. There was a lot of trade union action. These are things we don't hear that much now. There was a lot, and there was also uprising from young people who were about my age, who wanted to break down the power structures that kept them away from accessing land and having equal access to land and to education. So when I started working, and I started working in development rather than human rights at the beginning, my whole idea was to work towards breaking down these different power structures. And I guess the first kind of methodology, or first kind of way in which we used to think that these could be broken down, was by inclusion. So there was an era of including women in political participation, including women in development, including women in finance, and creating entrepreneurs from women. And there was a whole sort of euphoria of that era. But it is very apparent that while that did actually help certain women, I mean, I'm not saying it didn't, it hardly broke down the structures that kept women and other groups powerless, alienated, and disenfranchised. So in that journey, I began to realize that this is not just about power structures of patriarchy, class in Sri Lanka. It's all these power structures are so inextricably linked. They are so, they cross borders. They are linked to other power structures that are happening regionally, the geopolitics of my region, the international power structures that Toko referred to. And the last thing I want to say is there is another level or another set of power system that is also very insidious and kind of bolsters all these up. And that is what I would call the power of knowledge. I mean, there's a famous thing that is attributed to some English philosopher, I think Francis Bacon or someone, that says that knowledge is power. And I think this has been used, but in a very instrumental way. So we have a knowledge system that bolsters these kind of post-colonial, not even post-colonial, colonial kind of systems, institutions, ways of working that we are all embroiled in because it values certain knowledge more than other knowledge. And yesterday, I think in one of the sessions, some of the presenters talked about how important it was, how important Southern women are to feed the world, etc. But Southern women's knowledge about seeds, about agriculture, about all of those things are not really valued. So I think there's another whole power structure that envelopes the institutional and the political, economic and political institutional power and social powers that actually keep us in this kind of disempowered state.
Thank you.
I'll stop there.
Thanks. Yes, well, we are going to carry on the conversation. Thank you very much for both of you. And I think the local to the global and even the individual, Priyanti, talking about your mom and the, you know, as you were speaking, I think we identify a lot with having seen that, and we think, but if she was a man, things would have been completely different. In terms of, you know, being able to claim a place and space in a power structure. So this is a power structure where not only are you talking about an individual who is powerful in many different ways, but gender is what is holding back, or not only holding back, but suppressing and oppressing both her intelligence and you know, charisma, I think, if we want to put it that way. And talk about, you know, talking about Obama coming to power, it was a big moment. You may have been slightly more skeptical than the rest of us who were more romantic about it, thinking that, yeah, you know, not maybe something is going to happen, because surely, you know, if this was this is the most powerful person in the world, who hopefully has some sensibilities about, you know, how the rest of us are, how the rest of the world is different to, you know, his predecessors in that office, and finding ourselves very much disappointed in that. And if you're asking what does this have to do with me, that was exactly the question that, you know, you were onto the right set of thinking. What does it have to do with the rest of our sisters in many places that are still people living under occupation, living under oppression? What is that going to change? So that really is helpful to think about how already at the starting point we power systems are working in different ways, and that's that local to the global idea. I would like to just move a little bit from there and say maybe that one of the big, knowledge is power, yes, and we're going to get to the knowledge thing, but I would like to talk about money, because that is always what's coming across as being more about power, money, economies, political economies. GDP is supposed to tell us where and how we are located in the structures. So maybe I would just like to ask if you could touch a little bit about the question of money / wealth / economy and institutions, and in particular IMF, World Bank, and how those institutions are either how those institutions are part of this bigger power system, and what we need to understand ourselves much more within the women's rights movement around how that global architecture impacts us locally. So who would like to go first? I don't want to.
Can I just say something very quickly about it?
Yes.
And then I think Toko would be able to say more. But I think
you
you brought
have to say it quickly.
That's okay.
You can take your time.
I want to say that, I mean, you talked about the IMF, right? That's a really good example, because we've had 2 managing directors of the IMF that have been women, right? So we had Christine Lagarde, she was followed by this new person called Kristalina Georgieva. But that doesn't really mean, I mean, yes, so because of both of them were women, there's a little bit more talk, I'm told, in the boardrooms and stuff about mainstreaming gender, quote unquote. But it hasn't really changed anything. And it hasn't even changed anything after the pandemic. Sure, the IMF is giving out recovery loans, etc. But those loans are largely almost as business as usual. So it kind of completely, I mean, we didn't do anything to get the women in there. I don't think the women's movement was involved in that. But in just the fact that there were 2 women at the head of the IMF in the last so many years really speaks to the point that Toko made, that just having women is not really going to make change any more than just having a Black president of the United States is really going to change how the systems work. So that means that there is also another set of, so I think it's also about the power of these institutions. I think the power of the Bretton Woods institutions and even the UN and its treaty bodies have all been kind of, how do I say? I think they've kind of lost their original I think they've lost their original mandate, and they've become sort of solidified or consolidated around a sort of institutional, I don't really have the word for it, an institutionalized system of power that is very difficult to kind of dismantle. So I think that's a big challenge for all of us working in the human rights and women's rights movements. How do we challenge that? We are trying in the International Women's Rights Action Watch in Euro-Asia Pacific. We are having a whole week of deliberating on these issues starting from next Monday. So I will put the link in the chat and hope that you will come to that. But I'm not saying that by Christmas we are going to have the solution to change these institutions, but it is something that we just have to talk about.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Nanta, I'm not going to answer the question you asked because I think
Okay.
between you and me, you are more qualified to answer it. So I would like you to add on to answer yourself or to add on some information on that. What I would like to pick is what Lebu said in the chat or in the question and answer about what about Kamala Harris kind of thing. She added something, you can see it in there. I will use an analogy of three things. Diversity, I picked this up somewhere, is being invited to the party. So when women enter politics in political parties and things like that, that's at the level of diversity. Inclusion is being invited to dance on the dance floor. That's what the Kamala Harrises and other women who even maybe leading, being the head of World Bank and things like that, or IMF, is. Belonging is dancing your crazy dance and everyone joining in. We haven't arrived to belonging because the women have gone into certain spaces where we think they will wield power, but they have not been able to dance their crazy dance and have other people join in. Until we belong, we still need to look further and look at this space. Is it our space? And how can we use whatever space that we find ourselves in? Unfortunately, most of the time when women are dancing on the floor, they think they belong.
So there's another
Go ahead.
another comment in the chat, right? This is in the chat from Peggy, who says, do we want to be part of the current systems of power and knowledge systems, or do we want to burn it all down and build new systems? So what I'm thinking is, do we want that dance floor, or do we want to go start another dance floor? I'm just asking you, Doko.
For me, when I take a step back, I think we're not a homogeneous group. There are people who think they can go on the dance floor and dance and they will belong, kind of thing. And they have the courage because most of these women, yes, they might end up not taking the agenda that we have, but they are in very violent spaces. It takes courage for them to stand there, kind of thing. And also, when you say dismantle, I get an energy drain. I get an energy drain from all the fights, all the struggling, all the whatever. For me, I want to be able to be me in wherever I am, and to maybe back the system, if for no other word, kind of thing, and to just have the arrogance of deal with it. I'm here. I'm going to be who I am. I have got space here. Instead of, yes, we will sit here, but you need to change that and this for me or for us. I don't know, Priyank. I don't know. Because this dismantling It's like, when is it gonna stop? It's all on our shoulders as women to dismantle.
I'm just wondering if sorry, I'll read out the first on the question, the one from Lebohang, which was Obamaized yes. On that note, can you comment on Kamala Harris and the euphoria around her in some Black feminist circles, despite her track record of anti-Black state power and anti-migrant policies? How do we separate personal biographies from substantive transformational politics? That was the question that Toko was picking up. And she also asked, add women and stir, add Blackness and sip. And Toko's sounding somewhat despondent about dismantling systems, but systems have been dismantled to a certain extent, maybe not as much as we would like to believe. But at the moment, I think we're facing such huge moments of crisis and pushback on the gains that we thought were secured to a certain extent. And it's quite alarming to be seeing them moving back. And that's part of the reason why we have to really, you know, even this theme of confronting hegemonies is like, now we're seeing the hegemon in its, you know, in its full sort of going into fifth gear, full throttle, and no pretenses at all. So somehow there is a need to really think about like how we move that forward. And Priyanti, you brought out that phrase, knowledge is power, and knowledge and power systems. And I guess we are quite within the sort of South Feminist Futures projects, thinking about knowledge as being the, you know, part of what is unlocking the key to dismantling existing systems of domination and oppression. And maybe you could speak a little bit more to that as to how it works, both as how knowledge is for purposes of oppression, and how it's also, knowledge is also a tool for taking back power or dismantling power systems.
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of fascinated by this whole sort of epistemological kind of conversations around knowledge and knowledge hierarchies. And I think that is also because at some point in my journey to this, to 2020, there was a time when there was a big movement in to actually try to challenge the dominant knowledge systems, right? So there was a whole what was called an indigenous knowledge movement. There was a whole appropriate technology movement, which has now kind of translated into sort of issues around renewable energy, but has lost its way in other areas. And so I was all part of that. And that was all very exciting. It showed that we were centering the knowledge of women and people of the global South, opposed against sort of knowledge that came from Western and Northern universities. I remember doing a very exciting project with Practical Action, which is now called Practical Action. It was called Intermediate Technology Development Group in those days, called Do It Yourself. And it was about centering, showing that women, even though they didn't go and get physics or biochemistry degrees, they had knowledge that was actually scientific. So the whole definition of science itself was a kind of gendered colonial definition. And one of the most fascinating studies from that was a study about the way in which women in Sudan actually made kisra. I don't know whether you know kisra, any of you, but it's a bit like injera. It's a kind of sorghum kind of pancake, like a sorghum made from a fermented sorghum. And the person who did the study, who was a biochemist and who was a man actually, but he actually said that if he had to do the kind of processes that the women did on a day-to-day basis, making kisra in the kitchen, the processes were so subtle that if he had to do it in the lab, he would have had like some 31 processes or something to go through. So it just showed that the whole definition of what is scientific and what is not scientific, what is accepted knowledge and what is not, and who is educated and who is not educated, right? All of that is a hierarchy, and there was a challenge to that. But then I'm always saying that the empire always strikes back, right? So now that so there was that movement. Now we hardly hear, or at least I don't know, maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. But we don't hear about the indigenous knowledge movement or the appropriate technology movement in the same way, right? So I think, yes, I think knowledge is key to actually, knowledge should be used to challenge the systems. It sometimes gets co-opted into the dominant systems of power systems. And we've seen that a lot with knowledge, traditional knowledge from Asia, as you can see from anything from yoga to Ayurveda to healing systems, you know, that get kind of co-opted and commodified in the dominant system. But I think, yes, but how, and how we cannot be complicit in actually perpetuating that is, I think, also a challenge for us. That doesn't quite answer your question. That's my thought.
I think that's okay. I'm getting used to it. The conversation is not about, this is not an exam, by the way. You don't have to answer the question. We're here to get your thoughts and reflections, and hopefully the questions are sort of a doorway to more thinking rather than something that has to be answered, because we will carry on thinking about those things for quite a while. Toka, I'm not sure if you would like to add a little bit more onto that. And can I please just ask those who are in the chat, please feel just send me a message or raise your hand to if you would like to talk. So I think we can open the floor for those who want to speak. Kudzai, for example, was working at not when I met her, but I remember her working for the Intermediate Technology Development Group, it was called, hey? And it was at the time, and it was really like, wow, you know, they're coming up with these like technologies. She had a wonderful little clay pot which you could cook a whole stew with a few twigs almost. It was quite a lovely device, and we have not seen that since. And yet here we are talking about all the problems about access to energy, and but they really had some great things. So I'm sure a lot of people can come into that. Toko, go ahead, and then I'll read a couple of more questions, and please ask others to pitch in if they can. What are your thoughts with talking about knowledge and power and the appropriation of knowledge, commoditization, expertise, the experts? those who have knowledge and those who don't.
But Nancy, I don't think we have done justice to the question of money that you raised earlier on. And I've listened to you, my sister, speak around those issues. I really would love to listen to you again, expound on the question that you asked, because I think we can all benefit from that. Can you say a couple of things, long or short version?
On the money, okay, so I did A-level economics. That was my first introduction to money. Money as money and wealth as a system, supply and demand. I found it all quite fascinating. I wasn't, so, and it always just seemed to me that, even going through maybe doing more around economic justice, around trade, around aid, around debt. So I was doing a lot of questions that really related to money / wealth / the economy. And so it was always, maybe I wasn't part of the, not necessarily as part of the women's rights movement, but always sort of, even though there was important work happening around violence against women, many of the work that we were doing, it was always like, but we have to follow the money, because that's the thing that's in terms of disadvantage, men's, or the gendered nature of access to resources. And even then, when I say money, I can maybe talk even just land as being a very fundamental issue, because it was like, what are the factors of production: land, labor, capital, technology. So that whole idea of like how an economy works, how wealth somehow comes up, and how far away we are from our access to the factors of production, right? And I continue to be quite taken aback about, like, you then suddenly realize that these are, land used to not be a thing. People would be like, oh, but it's not a thing, it's, and then you realize when you want to go for it, even as women, how the barriers are put up, because people really understand that this is where the power is. Then labor, as this is how you earn your livelihood, this is how we earn money. And then labor rights were something that were a little bit secure before. And then you really see how those struggles, Priyanti was talking about her dad being in the trade union, those struggles for labor rights, and labor being our other means to wealth. If you can't inherit it through land, your next thing is labor. So the whole point about labor rights is for us to be able to have access to, wealth, prosperity, money, as it were. So the whole idea about how access to resources, factors of production, the way economies work, what GDP means, the work we did around trade was really revealing to me as well, to sort of like sit and understand how, like, I don't know, I think from the women's perspective, it was always something that we are expected to, it's not something that we are expected to have. That was the thing, it was just it's just one of those issues. And seeing how the people who have power are the people who have access to those kinds of resources and to be able to manipulate them. And so it's just that's the whole political economy type of thing to me that says a lot about power systems. So does that answer your question to my question.
No, I just, it did, and I loved listening to you, but also you asked me a question about experts. And I'm getting to a point where I'm feeling as if I'm not a panelist. I'm supposed to be expert. And in conversations, I don't think we should have people, single people talking. I think there are people that are listening that could add in. And I also love to have affirmation on what I'm saying when I'm talking to sisters, because it takes the ego out of me. And it says, I am in a knowledge system that is different, that is collaborated by sisters. That is a journey for us all. So I don't want to answer your question. I want other people to come in and answer your questions.
Folks, are you hearing that? Toko is saying straight up, we need more affirmation, but let me try and read a few of the comments. Sven says, great point. As much as the analysis of the strongholds of dominant power systems is when confronting them, is it not also essential to consider their weaknesses as entry points for transformative strategies? Which are the weaknesses of these power systems that Southern feminists can exploit for change? Nilangela blamed neoliberalism for severing economic justice from women's rights struggles, which is why we have South feminist futures. Yeah, so can we ask a couple of people to chip in? Lebohang, Nilangela, do you want to speak? Do you want to extend the point around blame neoliberalism for severing economic justice from women's rights struggles? I know
it's my sort of, pet peeve, isn't it? So thanks everyone. I think great conversation. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of speak to the question that Toko was asking Nancy to speak to, and I've been part of the women's movement, at regional, international level for now 20 years. And I think that, there is a question that feminists, definitely in the North, but also in the South, we have to interrogate what happened to our movements, post 1980s, and how it sort of coincided with the ascendance of neoliberalism, the stranglehold of neoliberalism across our countries through structural adjustment, which was imposed at the beginning, and then more and more of our countries, sort of, global South countries, nations, sort of took it on as the only way. There is no alternative was completely consumed by our own governments and which destroyed the sort of Southern solidarity, South-South solidarity that our post-independent states had sort of worked towards. We had the South internationalism conversation yesterday about a feminist Bandung. So all of these have coincided, and these are the geopolitics, the neoliberalism, state capture by business all over the world. All of these have coincided, and I think what we need to do is, as South feminists, is to have that conversation amongst ourselves and ask ourselves even tough questions, like where did we concede? Where did we cede power? Where did we sort of fail? What kind of strategies we need to evolve? Even through the UN, and Priyanti You know this much more than I do, but even through the UN, the sort of definition of friendly countries and allied countries, who are countries in the north, who are allies on the question of, and only sometimes, depending on the administration, allies on the question of violence against women or sexual and reproductive health and rights, but never allies on the question of trade, never allies on the question of what is happening to our governments, never allies in the question of at WTO, and they have pretty much captured our intergovernmental processes as well. So, these are the sort of questions we have to ask ourselves, conversations that we have to have, and sort of build anew, and maybe dismantle a little, Toko, I know you, but maybe dismantle a little as well. But we do have, we don't even have to build anew. I think we have in our histories. That's why, again, South Feminist Futures, we have in our histories those alternatives, those strategies, that we need to make it more feminist. We need to sort of bring in the question of queer rights, trans non-binary people, definitely do that, less patriarchal, definitely do that. But those are the conversations we want to have as South feminists. Sorry, I went on for quite a while. Sorry, Nancy.
No, that's great. That's great. I don't want to talk because I want to say a lot of things. Priyanti, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to. I think what Nilanjana said was really important, and I just want to refer to you to something that is extremely in the height of colonial kind of privilege, which is what the BBC calls the Wreath Lectures. And I just happened to bump into it, as one does when one is online during a pandemic and having sort of wanting to do something different. And it's a very interesting lecture. I will put the thing in the chat. But it discusses the issue of values versus value. And it says how the whole economic system, so it says that values, so it asks the question, for example, about how financial markets rate Amazon as one of the most valuable companies in the world, but the value of the vast region of the Amazon appears on no ledger until it's stripped of its foliage and converted into farmland, right? So the lack of what do we value and what is value, I think there is a disjunct there. And I think that is like the fundamental problem of what, Nancy, you talked about the factors of production. Do we value that, or have we shifted from that to looking at value based on what people will pay for something? So I think that shift has actually made strengthened this, is what kind of is fundamental to the whole neoliberal project. And talking about the UN, I mean, I think one of the things that I feel strongly working as closely as we do with the CEDAW committee, for example, and also recognizing the skepticism that many people have about the CEDAW and the treaty body process, is the fact that who is placing value on this, on the treaty body process. And the way I see it, there are many marginalized groups of women and gender non-conforming groups that are coming to the CEDAW process because they have no national space, and that many of the sort of bigger, more established groups are kind of bringing kind of gatekeeping some of the spaces as well. So I think those, so despite the skepticism, despite the fact that the CEDAW committee sometimes makes some very dodgy decisions, And there's some very, I think it's important that I agree with Toko that I don't really particularly want to dismantle it, but I think we need to find ways in which we bring conversations that are more aligned, that are more politically aligned with what we want. And I think in that sense, it's also good to think about the concepts of intersectionality, the concepts of coloniality, to bring those into the conversation so that we can do that sort of analysis and push the changes through that kind of thinking.
For me, taking up from where you were saying with Sido, I can say the same with UN Women. I can say the same with the concept of gender. For me, I go back to we have advocated and pushed for things as feminists. And before we arrive, we have let it being swept in the river. Why I am saying that is that we advocated for some of these structures to be put in. When they've been put in, they've been hijacked by agendas that are not our agendas. We have not found a way of doing a critique and an analysis that impacts on that a further restructuring. Because for me, it's a continuum. It's not an arrival. Because when we push, there's pushback. When we push, there's pushback. That's why also for the dismantling, I'm thinking when we're dismantling, where are all these opposition forces at? We'll be dismantling, they will be picking that brick and putting it back and maybe putting concrete instead of mud in it. So how do we continue to build what we have built? Because most of those things, they have come from the feminist movement pushing. They have come from, how do we keep going on to the next step and leave those who think they've reinvented the wheel at best one and we go to best two kind of thing. And I say that because I'm not wanting to feel like we're a super group. But I really get worried when everything and everyone now is a feminist. What does that mean when people jump up and say that? What does that mean for our analysis? What does that mean of the changes and the knowledge that we have? Because they appropriate our knowledge and they appropriate our definitions. And when they come out the other side, they are completely different. And yet people keep jogging on them.
Absolutely. My tiny little comment to put in on what Priyanti was saying about value, power is who decides what is of value and what is worthless. That's one of my ideas between the issue about the economy, because that was where it was like you could see that, this is what is valuable. Somebody is deciding it. Maybe earlier on I couldn't quite explain why certain things were valued more than others, even though to me they were important and they should have equal value, but that was the script, right? So we all followed it. And it's not even sometimes so much as, it's not so much what something is worth, but it's the power to define whether what you have is of value or not of value. And it applies to knowledge, it applies to labor, it applies to the forest and the economy and the ecology, and then what we call macroeconomic policy then sets things in motion. So I know we did some of the questions around CEDAW and those UN spaces. I hope we're going to talk more about that even in the course of this week, because these have been important spaces for us. We have achieved a lot, but I think it's, we should be able to reflect and critique and think about how we can strategize in those spaces more if we, if that's what we need to do. But I'd like to ask Lebohang, are you here still? If you want to add anything in there, we can give you the mic. And anybody else who would like to say something? Oh, can you unmute Lebohang? And if there's anyone else, I don't know everyone on the list, so it becomes a bit cliquey because I take the names that I recognize. But if anyone else wants to, please just raise your hand to add stuff. Do we have you, Lebohang?
You do,
Yeah.
Sister.
Okay. Do you want to add some thoughts?
I'm not camera ready, so please bear with me. I'm in bed trying to push. I've been awake all night, but I have to say this.
Your internet is breaking up slightly, Lebohang.
Conversation has been very invigorating. So thank you to both of the speakers. I mean, in the question, can you hear me? Oh dear.
Yeah, it's picked up now. It's picked up. It was a little bit slow. Oh no, it's gone again. Okay. We've lost Lebohang. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Kudzai? Do we have Lebohang back again? Oh, okay. We're back now.
I'm here, but I don't know if I'm audible, so I don't want to make this very painful.
It's just going slightly. Sorry, Lebohang. It's going. It's the connection is going a little bit on and off. I'm just wondering if there's anybody else who'd like to say a few words. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh gosh. Kudzai, you there? Okay, let's come back to the speakers, and go back to Priyanthi. Obviously, no one wants to talk because they're very much. I think Toko, you were asking about affirmation. I think the fact that people are quite happy to listen to us is affirmation enough. So take that. We have tried to, give the floor, and people are happy to carry on listening to the two of you, the three of us. So please, carry on. I have also added, Priyanthi, maybe you can speak a little bit also around the Global South Forum. as well, to just let people know about it. I've put the link in. We'll also try and promote it as well. We have 15 minutes left, so let's use them as best we can. Who'd like to go? Who'd like to? Is it Toko is going to talk, or Priyanti? Can people hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We are just trying to figure
Okay.
out which one of us is going to say something. And I don't think, I take Toko's point that it would be nice to have everybody else, but I do also understand how early it is in the morning for all of you in Africa, right? For me, it's like what, 15 minutes past 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but I can understand it's about 6 o'clock in the morning, and there's no way I'd show myself on camera at 6:30 or 7 in the morning. So I can totally understand that. And I don't feel like I'm speaking here as an expert. I'm just really grateful for this opportunity to share all these share all these thoughts that have been going on in my head in a safe space with people I know who will understand. I spent a lot of my life not working with people in technology, infrastructure, etc., and being in those spaces and trying to talk about my feminist ideas or principles was like, you can imagine, it was quite intimidating, right? And you had to just carry on. So I love this space, and thank you so much for being part of it. I can talk about the Global South Women's Forum, but maybe after Toko, do you want to say something?
Priyantha, I still want to wrap myself around the experts. How do we also dismantle the way we have conversations? That's, for me, that's why there was the wanting to hear other sisters. I know it's too early, especially for my side of the world. But how do we also dismantle the way we have conversations, the way we relate, the way we organize and think through the things we want to do? Because also we have, earlier on, I think it was Nancy who said that we have dismantled and built. But my problem is that when we have built a platform and put chairs there, some people have come and sat. It's not us. So the dismantling will continue to dismantle, but people will continue to take our space when we have done all the work. That's why for me, I just want to put a chair and sit there and say, dare push me out. Whether it's the knowledge systems we bring in or some other things in our organizing. And I really, for me, I really, really, really would like to emphasize the fact that we need to continually look behind what is at face value. We need to continually stand there in the glory of ourselves, because sometimes crowds come around us and they begin to say they are us. How do we keep standing so firmly and not be swept up in this crowd because it sounds and it feels like it's us, but it's not us. I'm saying that because there's a lot of stuff and a lot of analysis that is going on that is not sharp enough to create the holes, to punch the holes that we need to punch. And sometimes I get very, very worried about the neutralization of what I feel is not what I am saying or what I am struggling for. And it looks like, but it's not. Because there's too much out there that has become mediocrity in the women's rights activism.
You make a very important point about how much of what is out there that exists often is, you know, we were part of building, and we've been part of building, and then again, that's the point about power. You can appropriate what other people's work to use to your own ends. And what you're saying, I think, or what I'm hearing you say, is that we must build, dismantle on both sides, but be very careful about ensuring that we still have control over the direction of where things go, and avoid either being co-opted or being what we are part of building or dismantling or pushing, in terms of and avoid those being sort of appropriated by those who have power and who can easily use it to their own ends. And I think in women's rights, this is almost where we started the conversation earlier on, about how women's rights has also been appropriated by capitalism and by neoliberalism. And I do remember there was this narratives, it was called the Narratives Project, it was a sort of Bill Gates and others being a bit alarmed by the idea that people were saying we don't want aid anymore. I think it was in response to Dead Aid, the book, to say that, one of the things that we can use to justify our, for what is going to make philanthrocapitalism look good, essentially, is, women. If we talk about women and how women are wonderful, they are a really good PR exercise quite often. But it wasn't really about bringing women. It wasn't really about transforming systems, but rather defending systems, with women being instrumentalized for that. I hope I'm not missing Q&A. I've missed quite a bit of it. So we're almost. So I'm going to check the Q&As. Priyanti, can you just talk a little bit about the Global South Forum for a bit, and then for a couple of minutes, I'll come to the questions, and then we will wind up. I'll just read them out. But maybe you can just tell us about that.
Okay, thanks. Yes, I would like to. I think it's, I think while you were talking, you and Toko were talking, I was thinking there's one of the other things that we need to think about as women's rights organizations is to be also reflexive of our own actions and the way that we sometimes gatekeep and perhaps not bring in the voices of other people, right? So I think we also need to think about, if our analysis is to be strong and robust and help dismantle the kind of power structures that exist, we also need to be reflexive about ourselves, because we are also part of the system. We also have things like age, and all of those things that we kind of subscribe to, which need to be kind of interrogated. So the Global South Women's Forum was started by Asia Pacific in 2016, initially with the idea of challenging the Sustainable Development Goals and the whole 2030 agenda, which came out in 2015, which was set up as a sort of alternative space, but which actually had no space for civil society participation, nor had any links to the human rights framework. And of course had no particular space for conversations with women's rights organizations. So we created this space for women's rights organizations to come together to discuss all the issues around sustainable development, which is a very broad kind of mandate, right? So we had one in Cambodia, we had one in Rwanda, we had a regional one in Jordan, and last year in 2019, we had one in Kuala Lumpur for the Southeast Asia region. This year, we are doing something completely amazing and a bit like what you are doing. We have curated, or we have co-created with, I think it's about 24 or more women's rights organizations around the globe to have a forum that stretches from Monday to Friday next week, very much like this forum, but where each session is organized and run by different organizations. So it's really exciting because we have, say, for example, on the opening day, we have like an opening session with a group that has been using art to kind of mobilize Dalit and Muslim workers in New Delhi. We also have a session with a group from Zimbabwe who are looking at LGBTQI people and who are doing that through, or who are working with them, or comprise LGBTQI people, but who are working on who will present their session through poetry and the spoken word. We have a group of Kenyan fisher women folk who are doing a session. We have women from Sri Lanka's conflict affected areas. And then we also have the more kind of, I guess, cerebral conversations around trade, around financing for development, around social privatization and social systems. So it's a very exciting, very diverse. I know somebody asked what's the question about diverse, but this is really diverse. Diverse meaning like lots of very different people working in very different geographical spaces and working with very different constituencies. And each session is a session on its own. So I encourage you to go to the website and register. The registrations close on the 10th, but we will also have it being live streamed on our YouTube channel in case somebody misses it. So I'm just about to put the link in the chat box. Thank you. That's my break, my commercial break.
Yes, no, absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely. We want the conversation to continue and continue. It's good. It's not about just being the only ones doing things, but when all of us are doing something, it's going to amount to more and more. So we need to keep building up all the way. A couple of points here, Lebohang. What does dismantle mean? This language even has been co-opted. often it is a recreation of more of the same, with new languaging and buzzwords like diversity, tolerance, transformation, which are often an invitation to join Western imperial masculine politics rather than actually dancing to our own tune, as Toko says. This is a question and a comment. Neoliberalism supports itself through false ideologies that are enforced across sectors and spheres. And then we had one without a name, but how do we draw the line between commodification and mainstreaming? Important question. Is it an identifying true intent? I hope we can keep those all copied so that we gather them as part of our reflection moving forward. There was a very strategic question that was asked earlier on. I think it was Sven who brought it up about the weakness in the power systems, which is also a whole other topic to think about, because hegemonic powers do also the powerful also have their weaknesses as well, where it's not all weakness on one side and on the other side, and maybe we need to think about how not only do we acknowledge, identify and leverage our own strengths, but also understand the weaknesses in the system in many ways. So I want to just, Toko, I hope I haven't, I'm sorry if I've missed anything else, but Toko, we have 1 more minute or 2 more minutes to wind up before Letu closes our panel and we move on to the next one, because we have the next session is the patriarchal state in a neoliberal age. And there's a session after that on funding queer phobia and globalizing the anti-gender movement. And then we have the wonderful treat at 12 o'clock Dakar time, which is our plenary, Neocolonialism, the New World Order, facilitated by Saradzai and Nelangela. And we have Sylvia Tamale giving us a keynote, and Alejandra Santia also adding to that. And then in the after, we have a lot of sessions today. Women Defending the Commons, the Global Green New Deal and the Global South. And the final session is on globalization and corporate power. What's old, what's new? So I hope that anything that hasn't been answered here will be answered later. And Toko, you have like half a minute to close and we'll be done. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
I want to thank South Feminist Futures Festival for putting this up and for giving the platform this space and for doing the organizing. It's wonderful to have spaces like this, to have conversations, and all the sisters that are putting it together, holding it together. My love and care to you.
Thank you, everybody, for participating, as we say, in solidarity, in love, in power. Enjoy. Thank you, Priyanti. Thank you, Toko. Thank you to the team. Thank you to the interpreters. Thank you to the participants. Enjoy the rest of the day. We'll see you at the next session, we hope. Bye.
Thanks, Nancy. Bye.
Bye-bye. Are we all good?